Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las...
Buenos días a los intérpretes, si me escuchan. Comenzamos a hacer pruebas. Oh, okay. Kern, Spanish.
Sounds good. Yes. Yes.
It's okay?
Good. Yes.
Okay, second console.
Sounds good.
Okay, perfect, thank you. English. Good morning.
Sí, se le oye bien. 1, 2, 3, cabin, English booth. Can hear well.
Yes, it's okay, Kern? Okay, second console, English.
Houston, are we okay today? Ótimo.
Y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral. Que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement quédate en casa, que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to all member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, The Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Colleagues, can I ask you to be seated so we can get started? And I thank you all for being on time. Okay, thank you. I have been informed that we have quorum, and so I'm very pleased to declare open this joint meeting of the Permanent Council and the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, which is convened to consider the draft resolution titled Establishment of a Joint Working Group on the Eradication of Poverty and Combating Inequality and Social Exclusion in the Americas. I extend a warm welcome to my esteemed co-chair this morning, Ambassador Elizabeth Darius Clark, Permanent Representative of St. Lucia and Chair of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development. Ambassador Clark, welcome. Colleagues, in accordance with Article 43 of the Rules of Procedure of the Permanent Council and 28 of the Rules of Procedure of CD, I'm sorry, I understand there is no interpretation. Oops. Can we get that rectified, technical folks? Yeah. How do we know if it's working? It's working now? Okay. Thanks, and sorry for that little glitch. So as I was saying, in accordance with Articles 43 of the Rules of Procedure of the Permanent Council and 28 of the Rules of Procedure of CD, let us now proceed to the consideration of the order of business for this meeting, which was contained in document CP/OD-2521/24. If there are no objections, it is approved. Approved. Now, colleagues, I'm pleased to give the floor to Ambassador Elizabeth Darius Clark, Permanent Representative of St. Lucia and Chair of CD. Ambassador Darius Clark will be guiding us through the subsequent item on our agenda. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador Young. Esteemed colleagues, allow me to also welcome you to this joint meeting of the OAS Permanent Council and the Inter-American Council for Integral Development. As chair of the CD, I am delighted to co-chair today's joint session. Today's discussion calls on us to acknowledge the gravity of our region's current challenges, with nearly 30% of the population, some 180 million people living in poverty, and 70 million facing extreme poverty. The disparities in access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunity are felt most acutely by historically marginalized groups. These disparities are not only a barrier to equitable socio-economic development, but also to the consolidation of representative democracy across the Americas. Colleagues, the imperative for addressing the challenge of poverty eradication is precisely why our member states established CD. Article 94 of the OAS Charter states the following, and I quote, "The purpose of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development is to promote cooperation among the American states for the purpose of achieving integral development and in particular helping to eliminate extreme poverty in accordance with the standards of the Charter, especially those set in Chapter 7, with respect to the economic, social, educational, cultural, scientific, and technological fields," end of quote. The working group proposed in this resolution brings renewed focus on this CD mandate, offering an opportunity to build upon CD's established structure, mechanisms, and experience to intensify efforts in the fight against poverty. Our mission is twofold: to respond to the immediate needs of vulnerable populations while shaping a strategic framework that addresses the deeper structural drivers of poverty comprehensively and sustainably. Pursuant to the above, we shall now proceed to the second item on the agenda and consider the draft resolution entitled "Establishment of a Joint Working Group on the Eradication of Poverty and Combating Inequality and Social Exclusion in the Americas." As outlined in document CP/Doc 6038/24, Rev 6, presented by the Permanent Mission of Antigua and Barbuda, with the co-sponsorship of the permanent missions of the 14 member states of the CARICOM group, and of Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia. Before I give the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Antigua and Barbuda, I would like to express my gratitude to all delegations for the efforts in developing a text that reaffirms our strong commitment to eradicating poverty and to combating inequality and social exclusion in the Americas. I am pleased to now cede the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Antigua and Barbuda, who will present this draft resolution. Ambassador Sanders, the floor is yours, sir.
Put on your microphone, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, and good morning to all colleagues. I'm honored to introduce this draft resolution for the establishment of a joint working group on the eradication of poverty, combating inequality, and social exclusion in the Americas. I'm fortified this morning by the blessings of the representative of the Holy See, who personally blessed me this morning, for which I'm very thankful, before I introduce this resolution. I also want to point out that there has been an amendment to operative paragraph 4. That amendment was circulated this morning. It sought one small change, which was to include amongst the relevant entities the Special Rapporteurship on Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights, REDESCA. That is the only change, and it was circulated, as I said, this morning. Now, Madam Chair, colleagues, Today we have a defining opportunity to address poverty, one of the most persistent threats to stability and growth within our hemisphere. I extend my deepest gratitude to the co-sponsors of this resolution, whose commitment and collaboration have made this resolution possible. Together, we are stepping up to address poverty, which not only impacts economic resilience and stability, but threatens the dignity and well-being of persons across the Americas. Poverty is not only a social issue, it is a foundational threat to the economic resilience of each of our nations and our collective progress. Exacerbated by climate change, poverty's impact is deepening. As extreme weather events grow more frequent, communities are displaced and livelihoods are destroyed. Those already vulnerable are made poorer, creating an ongoing barrier to building resilience in our nations and in our hemisphere. In today's interconnected world, poverty respects no borders. It destabilizes societies and breeds challenges that impact every corner of the Americas. As long as poverty exists, our region remains vulnerable to irregular migration, to crime, and to youth violence, just some of the issues that weaken the foundations of our states and compromise our shared goals. Addressing poverty, therefore, is not only a moral imperative, but a strategic one that requires a united response. This draft resolution represents an historic turning point for our institutions. The establishment of the Joint Working Group will, for the first time, bring our region's poverty alleviation efforts under a single coordinated body that streamlines and strengthens our initiatives. We must seize this opportunity to eliminate inefficiencies, focus our resources, and ensure that every dollar, every resource, and every ounce of energy is used effectively to eradicate poverty. This resolution affirms a critical truth, Madam Chair, and that is no government can address poverty alone. True and lasting change will only come if we engage all sectors, civil society, the private sector, philanthropic organizations, academia, and each one of us as citizens of the Americas. This collaboration also allows us to harness expertise and innovation across the inter-American system, reinforcing our poverty reduction efforts and helping to make them more resilient to the impacts of climate change. It would also allow the Joint Working Group to collaborate with the international institutions and with global initiatives such as the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty moved by Brazil. Distinguished colleagues, this resolution has been shaped by more than 1 month of intensive consultation and discussion. In fact, it has been 6 weeks. It has also undergone one of the longest and most thorough deliberations in an open-ended meeting of all member states last Thursday, lasting almost 7 hours, more time than has been devoted to many other resolutions. That, I take, as an indication of the seriousness with which we all view this very important subject. The draft respects the diversity of our member states, acknowledging each country's right to implement the recommendations of the Joint Working Group in alignment with its unique capabilities and circumstances. It is in this context of extensive consultation and mutual respect that this draft resolution is before us today. Colleagues, by endorsing this resolution, we will send a clear message to the people of the Americas that the OAS, as their institution and its member states, stand united and determined to uplift the vulnerable, break the cycle of poverty and exclusion, and lay a foundation of opportunity and resilience for all. On behalf of the proponents of the resolution and the delegations that support it, by helping to make it relevant to all sections of our societies, including women and girls, indigenous people, people of African descent, and older persons, we call for full support of this resolution to demonstrate our collective deep commitment to eradicate poverty and to create a more stable and prosperous future across our hemisphere. Madam Chair, on that basis, my delegation respectfully proposes that this resolution to establish a joint working group to eradicate poverty and combat inequality and social exclusion be submitted to a vote immediately. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saron. At this point, colleagues, the resolution is put to a vote, and so I will pass to the chair of the PC, who will conduct the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Just to be clear, my understanding is that the resolution is being sponsored by 18 delegations. And of course, I was of the opinion that we had consensus on this resolution. Am I mistaken? Do we have consensus on the resolution? Don't we? Okay, Bahamas, please. Oh, sorry, Antigua and Barbuda. Please go ahead, Ambassador.
Mr. Chairman, I invoke the rules of procedure of the Permanent Council, and I say that this delegation has properly moved for a vote on this resolution. I do not think the chair has a choice in this matter, sir, with all due respect.
Thanks for the clarification. Bahamas, you have the floor.
Chair, I suspect I should have withdrawn, simply to state that the call for a vote has been requested, and it is an open vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Colombia, you have the floor.
Microphone, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you once again. And on the other hand, I should like to propose that the resolution, well, I see that there are some points and that this be approved by acclamation, notwithstanding anything else.
Thank you very much. So it has been approved by acclamation. Okay. They got me there. Okay, so approved. And who says we don't have fun here? Okay, colleagues. Sorry, Ambassador, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Indeed, I am delighted that we have approved this resolution by acclamation. And I wanted to, as a result of that, to say to all of the member states represented here that this is a resolution, I think, about which we should all be very proud. Equally, we should all be very pleased with the fact that we participated vigorously and robustly in debates to make sure that the resolution was put before us today is a resolution that will be of benefit to the people of the Americas. that we have done that this OAS institution has shown that it can stand up for something that is meaningful to the people of the Americas, in fact, lies at the root cause of many of our problems, economic, financial, even the problems of voting in an election, not here, but in countries where poor people are not able to exercise their franchise because of poverty, because a polling station may be too far for them to be able to travel, and they do not have the money to do it, that they may be ill and unable to find somebody who will take them to a polling station. All of these this may seem to be a small matter, but when the poor are excluded from the opportunities for decision-making in a society, in any way, shape, or form, they become disenchanted. They feel disinherited. It is up to society as a whole to ensure that social exclusion, inequality, and poverty is eradicated from our societies. We will not do that overnight, but I am very proud that today this institution has taken a first step along that long road. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. At this point, my job on the voting is finished, so I'll pass it back to our co-chair.
Colleagues, I now invite the distinguished delegations to take this opportunity.
Colombia is asking for the floor.
Yeah. Okay. To address the recently adopted resolution. The floor is open, and in that regard, I give the floor to Colombia.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman and Mr. Chairman. It's very pleasant to have two main groups here, PC and CD, here at this session. Very gratifying, and my delegate would also like to express its deep satisfaction that the resolution was approved by acclamation. This is very definitive, and it gives life breath to the working group on the eradication of poverty and the fight against inequality and social exclusion in the Americas. Today, more so than ever, the fight against poverty, the slashing of inequalities, the promotion of social inclusion, as well as preserving and the sustainable use of natural resources are basic challenges which are interrelated and that the hemisphere has to grapple with. And right now, we're working with COP16, which is taking place in Cali. Overcoming these challenges is essential to achieve sustainable development. Madam Chairman, Mr. Chairman, we cannot forget that this is an initiative that emerged directly from something which initially we called, and I would have liked it to have remained, but the Manifest Against Poverty, which we presented with the mission of Antigua and Barbuda and with the Secretary General on the 22nd of August. And then finally, this was embraced without this wording that we felt was very strong and forceful, but we accepted the change. And it's also very important to underscore that the spirit that this manifest or this draft is the same. It's to push ahead, and the ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda just said so that this organization takes seriously the purposes and principles that are enshrined in the foundational charter. They are all related to the eradication of poverty in the hemisphere as one of the crucial goals of this organization. And this is why we have multilateralism, so that we deal with these kinds of challenges. So along that line, then, we will very actively participate in the deliberations of the working group with a view to building a plan of action, one that is solid, that will allow us to identify and propose policies, programs, and effective measures to reduce poverty in the region. Chairman, once again, we offer a clarion call to all member states, with the permanent observers and the entities in the Inter-American system and the multilateral pertinent organizations to join in behind this proposal and the purpose and proposal for which we're here today. And we hope that we will also have the academic community, the philanthropic organizations, institutions from civil society and the private sector, because only with the live people in the region can we get concrete results for the benefit of all of our citizens and our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of the Bahamas.
Good morning again, and good morning all. I should say co-chairs, Chair of the Permanent Council, Chair of the Council on Integral Development. The Commonwealth of the Bahamas stands in full support of this pivotal resolution and commends the permanent mission of Antigua and Barbuda, and in particular, the Dean of the Corps of Permanent Representatives, Sir Ronald Sanders, alongside the sponsoring member states, and for bringing this issue to the fore. Poverty eradication remains a primary mandate of this organization. It's a part of 3 of the organization's related charters and is an essential goal for sustainable progress across our hemisphere. The establishment of this joint working group on the eradication of poverty, combating inequality and social exclusion is a decisive step towards realizing this vision. We cannot be pedestrian, and we cannot ascribe to ancient thinking that the poor will always be with us. This is a matter of utmost importance, not only because poverty erodes human dignity and impedes human rights, but because it destabilizes our societies and impedes social cohesion and economic growth. For a small island developing state like the Bahamas, the multidimensional nature of poverty includes a vulnerability to climate change, economic volatility, and limited access to resources, which exacerbates social exclusion. As we embark on this mission, we must integrate a multidimensional and intersectional approach to poverty, which recognizes that issues of inequality, social exclusion, and environmental degradation are interlinked. It is crucial that the working group aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Goal 1, 2, and I quote, end poverty in all its forms everywhere, and I close quote, and strive for synergies with other international initiatives as reflected in the draft resolution. In this context, the Bahamas emphasizes the importance of including voices from diverse sectors that includes civil society, academia, the private sector, and regional development institutions, who bring invaluable perspectives and resources to the table. Furthermore, the economic empowerment of marginalized populations, including women, youth, and indigenous communities, must be at the heart of our strategy, as their empowerment translates directly into stronger, more resilient communities. And we can't forget the importance of education. Colleagues, Excellencies, the Bahamas fully supports the establishment of this working group and calls for the timely development of a comprehensive plan of action. We look forward to working collaboratively with all member states to secure the resources needed to advance poverty eradication across our region. Let us therefore honor our commitments to the citizens of the Americas by creating a future where poverty, inequality, and social exclusion are issues of the past, and do away with our narrow objectives. This is a matter that should be important to all of us. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Bahamas. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Haiti. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Madame Co-Chair. Thank you, Chair. Monsieur le Président, permettez-moi avant toute chose d'exprimer notre profonde reconnaissance envers l'ambassadeur Sanders pour son rôle moteur dans la présentation de ce projet de résolution.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Ambassador Sanders, who spearheaded this, and it was accepted by acclamation. We attach particular importance to this initiative, and we will continue to keep a footnote fully respecting the importance and the sense of this text.
The fight against extreme poverty is a fundamental fight for countries, developing countries, in particular for my country, Haiti. Poverty also exacerbates inequality and affects security. And that's why we propose a change for the preamble paragraph 1 of the resolution that highlights the importance of this in the Americas. And we'd also like to highlight the connection between extreme poverty and the model of development that we have adopted. As well as those that international financial institutions have adopted, as well as organizations in our countries. We need to work in these topics to address inequality and social exclusion, and we need an effective path that helps us to allow development to be integral, always keeping in mind the features and the unique features of each and the circumstances of each country. And so on behalf of Haiti, and just like many countries in the region, the fight against inequality and social exclusion and extreme poverty is related to the local situation that we are living. And that is why we support this draft of resolution that we've just approved that highlights, as I said, the circumstances of each country, and that helps us to address the issues that affect each and every one of us in our peoples. So, President, our hope is that Haiti will also contribute to this fight, and that you can also help us in our fight against extreme poverty and the threat of security in our country and our citizenry. Thank you so much for your attention.
The floor to the Ambassador of Brazil.
Obrigado, senhora.
Thank you so much. Thank you, for Chair of the Permanent Council. Brazil would like to approve the resolution proposed, as well as the establishment of the Joint Working Group. In the inter-American context, we hope that this new group can highlight the work that's already being done in terms of social development and social development.
No âmbito global,
globally, we are deeply satisfied, and it's really very important to have some synergy between the working group and taking into account hunger, looking at the priorities that the Brazilian president of the G20 looks at. As has been mentioned before, the G20 opens up the entire world, governments, international organizations, think tanks, development banks, and other philanthropic institutions. All of them want to join in this collective effort, and they're more than welcome. I would also like to just reiterate the invitation for all member states and permanent observers get together to the alliance, and that will be launched in November this year. I'm very honored that we have the Secretary General of the OAS as one of the founding members. We are at an advanced process so that many countries and other organizations, FAO and the World Bank, or IDB has put an important proposal as to specific withdrawal rights in the benefit to work against hunger in Latin America and the Caribbean. And despite some of the progress made in some parts of the world, poverty and hunger continue to be global, persistent challenges that undermine stability and development with relevant impact in public health, inequality, intergenerational inequality, and the environment. Social policies are not enough for low-income countries. Financing mechanisms that exist now often are fragmented and low-scale, high transactional costs, and represent risk. And here, the global violence and now the recent working group that has been established should grapple with the fight against poverty with perseverance and devotion. We have to concentrate our efforts in the implementation of public policies that have been successful, which are already present in the basket of policies to be adopted in keeping with the reality of each country. Brazil will be working constructively and fruitfully with the work that we just established. We will prioritize concrete results that slash poverty and hunger in the region, and that will strengthen the role of the OAS as a driving force of solidarity in the Americas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brazil. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Canada. So you have the floor.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda for presenting this resolution that is being presented during this Permanent Council meeting. And Canada reaffirms that the fight against extreme poverty is very important and continues to be important in the fight against social exclusion and extreme poverty and inequality in our hemisphere. We would also like to highlight that establishing this joint working group should align with other mechanisms that already exist so that the group can work effectively and take advantage of the resources that are already quite limited to, in this way, avoid duplication of efforts and work more efficiently. Our actions must continue to target the fight against poverty and work in favor of prosperity of all of our peoples, as well as in the UN pacts. They highlight a common path that will help us to continue working toward the eradication of poverty, combating inequality, and access to education and economic stimulation, all within the context of climate change. Our commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals is
Advocates Group. Together and alongside other influential leaders, they are actively promoting the importance of making progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals and advocating for greater ambition on the 2030 Agenda. The primary objective of Canada's feminist international assistance policy is the eradication of poverty. To achieve this, we must address inequality. Specifically, we need to make sure that women and girls are empowered to reach their full potential by ensuring their lives are free from violence, participate fully in society, and earn their own livelihoods should they wish. Only this and these efforts that can benefit women and girls will also benefit their families, contribute to economic growth of their communities and of their countries. This is why Canada adopted a feminist international assistance policy, driven by the conviction that putting gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in all their diversity at the center of international assistance is the most effective way to build a more peaceful, inclusive, and prosperous world. In this vein, Canada has been very active in the Americas, supporting efforts to eliminate gender-based violence, addressing the unequal division of unpaid care and domestic work, and supporting women's rights organizations who are at the forefront of advancing gender equality in their communities. Canada also supports programming to advance health, including sexual and reproductive health and rights, education, sustainable development, the green economy, and renewable energy. We recognize the interconnected nature of these issues for the eradication of poverty. We must continue to stand united to build a world where poverty is not just reduced, but where it is eradicated. In partnership with all member states, Canada remains committed to creating a better place for all, where inequality, on any grounds is finally overcome and where no one is left behind. Madam Chair, I thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Costa Rica.
Good morning, Chairman, distinguished permanent representatives, delegates, members of the Secretariat. I would like to start by emphasizing that the eradication of poverty in all of its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, continues to be and will continue to be one of the highest priorities for Costa Rica, and I'm sure that it is for all member states of this organization. We recognize the firm commitment that the OAS offers to eradicate poverty, combat inequality, and promote social inclusion, as stated in the resolution that we've just adopted by acclamation. And we welcome its adoption, and we congratulate this Permanent Council for the excellent work and effort made in order to materialize the adoption. However, I would like to refer to the negotiation process, and we would like to make a call for our discussions to continue to take place within a framework of respect for all opinions expressed for the delegates, for the established procedures, and with adherence to transparency in the negotiation process. And we are concerned that some member states have expressed their dissatisfaction with the hasty convening of this meeting without complying with the established regulatory deadlines. And this is a concern we share from the Costa Rican side, and we consider it essential that any document or resolution be the result of an open and inclusive consultation, as underscored in the Joint Declaration on Shared Commitments, to ensure open, transparent, and inclusive negotiations in the OAS, promoted by the delegation of Brazil. With this in mind, I would like to recognize the value that the proposal to establish a joint working group on eradication of poverty that has been presented by Antigua and Barbuda with the co-sponsorship of the majority of other member states. This working group offers an opportunity, an invaluable opportunity, to address the issue of poverty in an integral manner, such as is highlighted in the preamble of the resolution, incorporating multidimensional approaches that combine social protection systems, investment in human capital, and inclusive policies that reduce inequalities and increase resilience in the region, focusing especially on the most vulnerable populations. It is crucial, however, that this working group be a complement and not a duplication of efforts that are already being made at other groups, as we've expressed in the negotiating room together with other delegations. We agree with the concern expressed by the Canadian delegation regarding the creation of new follow-up mechanisms and the need to avoid duplication of efforts already underway in the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, in particular with regard to SDG 1 on the eradication of poverty. We must be careful not to fragment available resources, but rather ensure that the actions that we adopt are coordinated and streamlined. In Costa Rica, we have shown that well-designed policies can generate concrete results, as reported at a press conference by the President of the Republic of Costa Rica a few days ago. The results of the 2024 National Household Survey issued by the National Institute of Statistics and Census show a historic reduction in poverty in our country, reaching 18%, which is the lowest level recorded in recent years. This improvement has been made possible thanks to a national effort based on the strengthening of social protection systems and equitable access to health and education, as well as the promotion of decent and well-paid jobs. Undoubtedly, we will continue redoubling our efforts. Mr. Chairman, I believe that our national experiences should serve as an input to enrich this draft resolution. by formulating our recommendations in the negotiation process, we did so not only from the perspective of a country committed to the fight against poverty, but also as part of a hemispheric community that shares the same challenges. And it is fundamental that the working group coordinates its actions with international financial institutions, multilateral development banks, and other key actors, as is reflected in the resolution text. And this approach will allow or ensure that the resulting policies have the necessary resources and technical capacities for their implementation. My delegation calls on us to respect the competencies and procedures within the OAS. Any modification or mandate that arises from this resolution must comply with existing procedures and strengthen coherence within our organization. While the issue of poverty is cross-cutting and requires priority attention, we must ensure that the decisions that we make here strengthen the existing mandates of the OAS and that they do not generate conflicts of competence among its organs. In closing, regarding poverty eradication, the social panorama of Latin America and the Caribbean of 2023 of ECLAC provides us with alarming figures. In 2023, the number of people living in poverty in the region reached 201 million people. That's 32.1% of our population. And of these, 82 million people live in extreme poverty. That is 13.1% of the population. And these numbers not only underscore the magnitude of the challenge, but also the urgency of strengthening our actions and our commitments. With this data, it is very clear that inequality persists, and it requires a profound transformation of our social structures and our economic structures. The fight against poverty cannot be merely an aspiration. It must be a shared responsibility among our states as well as among the international and regional institutions. We thus reaffirm our commitment to continue working in a coordinated manner to overcome the challenges our region faces, ensuring that every individual, regardless of his origin or condition, has access to the necessary opportunities for it to prosper. Poverty eradication is not only a goal, it is a collective responsibility. Together, we can build a region where each and every person has this priceless opportunity to thrive. Thank you very much.
Now recognize the Ambassador of Mexico.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Ms. Chair and Mr. Chair. Mexico reiterates the need that we cannot postpone, which is also set forth in its charter, that recognizes that poverty is a challenge and a barrier to the democratic realization of our peoples. And in this context, over years, we have been working here at the OAS on a robust institutional architecture for the Americas for the adoption and implementation of actions and strategies that target combating poverty, as well as addressing its structural causes with a focus on human rights in order to strengthen public policy and national competencies. And so in the face of this complex challenge of eliminating poverty and promoting integral development, the member states of the OAS decided to establish in 1996 the Inter-American Council for the Integral Development, or CD, which entered into force with the Managua Protocol. And since then, the CD has dedicated itself to promoting cooperation among the American states in order to achieve integral development, and in particular to contribute toward the elimination of extreme poverty. And the CD already has CIDES at its disposal and adopts political resolutions and decisions regarding issues where poverty is a main focus. In 2002, in the Dominican Republic, the Santo Domingo Declaration was adopted. It was called Strengthening Hemispheric Cooperation toward the Resilient Reconstruction and Sustainable Development of the Americas. And it had specific mandates for eradicating poverty, extreme poverty, and reducing inequalities. Those mandates, permanent representatives, are still outstanding. In 2025, Mexico will hold the 6th ministerial, and we highlight the fitting context of the OAS to consider proposals and approaches for eradicating poverty and inequalities in our region that affect women more than others. The special report on economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights of the called REDESCA highlights the public policy work for guaranteeing human rights of the Americas in order to strengthen the development of standards for the design and implementation of public policies that are inclusive and equitable and based in comparative analysis, best practices, and aligned with the inter-American human rights standards, to which Mexico fully supports after having recently contributed to the Voluntary Contribution Fund. And we would urge the member states to form part of this initiative in order to move toward inclusive and equitable development. And it is especially important here during this joint meeting of the Permanent Council and the CD to keep in mind the call made by REDESCA to the states of the region on the 17th of October on the International Day of the Eradication of Poverty, so that they implement economic policies and fiscal policies based on with a human rights approach, with the goal of eradicating poverty and combating inequality in all of its forms and dimensions. The REDESCA also highlighted that indivisible human rights and interdependent human rights are intrinsically linked to dignity and the inherent dignity of each individual, and that poverty, extreme poverty, and material inequality continue to be a barrier to the full guarantee of these rights that in particular affect women. And it is clear that the OAS, now for decades, has had the mechanisms and the spaces and initiatives with which to eradicate poverty, and that it works consistently to improve public policy in the Americas in order to achieve this. And that is why we make a call to strengthen those processes and mechanisms and reinforce our commitment within the CD's framework for 2023 and the REDESCA in order to reduce this scourge, which dramatically impacts women, which represent half of the population. In Mexico, we promoted a social policy that was focused on people as the holders of rights, and we responded to the historically and systematically discriminated populations. In the last mandate, Mexico has achieved with great effort reducing the percentage of the population in poverty from 42% in 2008 to 36.3% in 2022. In other words, more than 5 million people left a life of poverty in Mexico, and 7 of every 10 households receive social program support. And Mexico is firmly committed to the Sustainable Development Goals for the 2030 Agenda in order to achieve authentic sustainability and sustainable development with a focus on human rights. Chairman, Mexico reiterates its firm commitment to the combating of inequality and the reducing of social exclusion in the Americas. And we take this opportunity to reinforce the processes and organs that exist in the inter-American system, and we urge the strengthening of the CD and its technical and political relevance, and to fulfill the mandates that with this objective, the General Assembly of the OAS recently approved. Thank you, chairs.
Thank you, Mexico, and I'll give the floor to the Ambassador of Bolivia. So.
Thank you very much. The plurinational state of Bolivia is very happy to accompany and co-sponsor the initiative of the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda in the presentation of the draft resolution to establish a joint working group on the eradication of poverty and combating inequality and social inclusion in the Americas. In the last study, the last economic study of Latin America and the Caribbean, published by ECLAC and called Low Growth, Unemployment, Climate Change, it tells us that the macroeconomic scenario of our countries in our region look at low economic outcomes, results, and a limited space when it comes to fiscal and monetary policies, in addition to the negative consequences given climate change that affects all of us. ECLAC affirms that the indicators of economic activities on a monthly basis show that low growth for the first quarter of 2024 has been generalized in all the economies of the region, whilst the growth rate of Latin America is reduced and is 1.7 average percentages between the first quarter of 2023 and the same period for 2024. In the economies of South America, Central America, and Mexico, the low growth led to reductions in 1.8 and 1.5 percentage points, respectively, which underscores, of course, or is very alarming. ECLAC also refers in its study to the vulnerability of Latin America and the Caribbean, given climate change or climate crisis, which is exacerbated by the low levels of inequality and poverty that are present in our societies. On the average, more than 50% of people who are work in the informal sector, and they don't have access to social systems of protection or unemployment insurance. And this shows us that countries in our region are exposed to many different challenges to eradicate poverty and hunger in the region, and therefore to reach the objectives of Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. Particularly, we emphasize and we underscore that the social sector most affected by poverty and extreme poverty is, of course, always the vector looking at women. Given this situation, we feel that all efforts made by our organization to make strides in eradicating poverty, inequality, and social exclusion of the countries of our region is very valued. The Charter of the OAS stipulates in its initial purposes of this region eradication of poverty, critical poverty, which is an obstacle to the full-fledged development of the peoples of the Americas. In this regard, then, it established the CD with a view to promoting cooperation amongst American states, with a view to having integral overall development to contribute to the elimination of critical or extreme poverty. And in this regard and understanding this, CD and human rights organizations and the Rapporteurship for Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights are allies for our countries and undoubtedly need to be better valued alongside the other organizations which are included in the text of the resolution that we approved today. Ladies and gentlemen, in the plurinational state of Bolivia, in the last 20 years, we have achieved slashing extreme poverty from 38% to 14%, according to the indicators from the United Nations. In terms of population, this means that more than 2.5 million people, almost a quarter of the Bolivian population, has left extreme poverty in the last few years. But if we stop and think, what is extreme poverty? It means not to have the necessary resources to eat properly, to be fed properly. In other words, this means to not eat 3 times per day, only once or twice per day, and over and above everything else, to sleep every day with hunger in your belly. And this is something that really should beg for our attention and our concern. The creation of a well-being where we have adequate distribution and redistribution of wealth seems to be the solution. And that is why Bolivia, we have called it to live well and be a being. There's also a relationship between poverty and democracy. The ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda made a very important reference to this. Oftentimes, people cannot go to the voting centers because of extreme poverty. And in many of our countries, the vote has become an asset for people who live in extreme poverty. They have sold it because of a small gift, and thus belying the basic principle of democracy. Now, with this joint working group, PC and CD, this is a fundamental and very important contribution for us to analyze all of the efforts with a view to making strides in eradicating inequality, social exclusion, and poverty, to work for the well-being of our people. And once again, I say it, this is the raison d'etre of our state and this very organization itself. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Bolivia. I now give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Chair. Eradicating poverty in our hemisphere is an important goal, and the United States is committed to working toward a more prosperous and equitable future for our whole region. The United States is pleased to note that based on the most recent available data, our official development assistance, ODA, to Latin America and the Caribbean increased from $2.2 billion in 2018 to $2.9 billion in 2022. The U.S. actively engages in collaborative regional initiatives, such as the Alliance for Prosperity and the plan of the Alliance for the Prosperity of the Northern Triangle. These initiatives aim to address the root causes of poverty by improving security, governance, and economic opportunities in regions most affected by poverty. Partnerships with the private sector are also a cornerstone of the U.S. strategy, driving sustainable development and job creation in underserved areas. In addition, many OAS programs and efforts through CD have already demonstrated success in reducing poverty and promoting sustainable development. We hope that the work to be undertaken by the proposed working group in the declaration complements and supports the ongoing work by existing OAS programs to address poverty. Care should be taken in implementation to avoid duplication of efforts, as well as to seek using existing internal OAS resources. The United States will submit a footnote, and we hope that it is reflected in the final version of the resolution. We look forward to discussing and to working with member states in our shared efforts with the OAS to reduce poverty in our hemisphere. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Argentina.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman and CD, Chairman of the Permanent Council, and permanent representatives and alternates. The delegation of Argentina hopes that this working group that was established today according to the resolution for the eradication of poverty, combating inequality and social exclusion in the Americas looks at a diversity of ideas, and it is pluralistic and considers all of the conditions that are prevalent in the region, that it is enriched with the experiences that our nations have, that it takes on an overview of the policies that have led us to the current situation inherent in poverty and exclusion. In some, that it doesn't overlook the lessons that come from history. The economic history of Argentina shows that investment in human capital in a context of economic freedom produces the best results when it comes to growth and a reduction of poverty. This is what happened in Argentina since the national organization of 1953 to the Great Depression of the 30s. And at that time, my country experienced high growth and high levels that took care of the poorest sectors, and that's why we had many European immigrants that came to our country that had higher salaries than their countries of origin. On the one hand, the liberal ideas of Juan Bautista Verde, which are in the national constitution, and on the other hand, the educational policy of Domingo Faustino Sarmiento, our president at the time, allowed Argentina to be one of the first countries to vote on literacy in the first decade of the 20th century, and during that time Argentina reached per capita income levels which were similar to the most advanced countries of the world. In contrast to this experience, since the 30s, and more accentuated, the state intervention looked at income and led to degrading results, because not only did it not reduce poverty and it created economic clientelism, they introduced ongoing inflation over 6 decades and growing when it comes to macroeconomic poverty, which led to hyperinflation between 1989 and 1990. The experience of this period showed that inflation is the most effective mechanism to create poverty and inequality, and unless it becomes a growing obstacle for the efficient use of capital and productive development. The stabilization policies and the economic reforms and liberal views of the 90s gave Argentina macroeconomic stability with growth, but it was not enough for employment because there were labor regulations that led to growing informality and conspired against productivity and development. Now, after a liberal decade, we abandoned liberalism, and Argentina began, as of 2002, a new period of economic closing off things, looking at the state of the side and looking at state interventionism in all markets, in all economic activities, and in foreign trade. With these policies, these populist policies, macroeconomic instability returned and inflationary trends. And we had never seen hitherto levels of poverty. In December 2023, President Milei received a broken country without credit, with 200% of inflation, with more than 50% of people living under the poverty line. President Milei, as the candidate, was very sincere in his prognosis and in his purpose. The popular mandate was very clear. It was urgent and imperative to stabilize things. In other words, to clamp down on inflation and to reduce the size of the state and to deregulate so as to release the productive forces. Determined to look at this fiscally and to rationalize public spending, the government of President Milei eliminated bureaucracy and privileges. The only privileged subsidies are the ones that exist that now get or go through to the most vulnerable countries without any intermediaries. Far from reducing things, when the means in the subsidies ended, we call them intermediaries of poverty because they distributed things contrary to everything, and it was all based on clientelism. But the pillar to eradicate poverty is not subsidy. It is a creation of human capital in Argentina and productive employment. To generate employment, first, it is necessary to stabilize things. To stabilize things, we have to have policies of zero poverty, monetary control, and free economic policies with a very ambitious process of deregulation and privatization. President Milei started to promote a cultural and economic change which takes Argentina out of its status quo, which was troubling us for the last 100 years, so that this experience can be part of our country again. Only after 10 months, he began to show very promising results. Inflation has been slashed by 25% to 3% monthly, and recession inherited is now being reversed. With savings and investment and growth, we can combat poverty. In a free government such as Milei's, economic growth will come based on investment in productive activities, where Argentina has a comparative advantage given its natural resources and given the quality of its human capital. The state doesn't run the economy, but rather promotes the creation of human capital and creates the conditions to free up productive forces. The values behind these policies that we're already implementing with respect for life, freedom, and property. And Argentina will be in the forefront for freedom. And this is a value which, as a sovereign company and which, as owners of our own destiny, will be ahead in all the fora. We wanted to leave behind 100 years of populism, interventionism, and frustration. And with our experience, we have to say that there's no better way to eradicate poverty than with genuine growth, guided by the forces of the free market and full-fledged freedom for all citizens. For everything that we've said, and given all of the negotiations, Argentina will have a footnote And that takes note of our national position. And that's all I wanted to say for the moment, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much.
Tina, I now give the floor to the Ambassador of El Salvador.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and you, sir, Mr. Chairman. El Salvador approved the resolution for establishing a joint working group on eradication of poverty and combating inequality and social inclusion in the Americas. We felt that it was a very relevant topic for my country and a common concern for all member states of this organization. To eradicate poverty, critical poverty, is one of the main purposes which is enshrined in the OAS Charter, and everybody here has a clear-cut idea that poverty, in its many multiple dimensions, restricts opportunities for human development, a guarantee of having rights, and perpetuates social inequalities and economic inequalities as well. To get to equality and equity is an unfinished task, and it's an urgent challenge that requires attention in the quest for solutions with multilateralism, making efforts by all states. And in this regard, then, we recognize the importance and the duty to strike agreements in the inter-American arena with transparent mechanisms and participatory efforts. These are priority issues. They're very complex. We have to privilege dialogue and build far-reaching solid consensuses so that the approach can be strengthened from the standpoint and the contribution of all states. Having said that, it is of interest for my country to be an active part of this working group, which has been put together to make contributions to the dialogue with our experience. Madam Chairman, El Salvador looks at the well-being of its population. That's our homework, that's our task, and we have different strategies and policies that deal with the problem and in different approaches. In the social protection and development law, we have a development plan for social protection 2019 to 2024 through the implementation across the board of strategies to eradicate poverty with its 4 different components: socioeconomic, family attention, productive programs, support for reduction of the inequality gap, and infrastructure, social infrastructure, that is to say. We have spearheaded a host of different complementary policies that look towards eradicating poverty and food insecurity. The normative or regulatory rules for children, the other laws, the Ley Amor, and the Let's Grow Together, which looks toward the eradication of the pressure over the cycle of life, with special emphasis on early childhood. The model for sustainable food is a blueprint which looks at nutritional and food security through a holistic and inclusive approach. The food school programs and sustainable programs favors nutrition and teaches our children, and establishing things through Ministry of Agriculture have more than 50 agro-markets with a view to supporting quality food which are accessible for the economies of Salvadoran families and pays for different essential products, facilitating access to foodstuffs at fair prices. And in addition to this, as part of the second mandate of President Bukele, we have got underway a plan that has 3 approaches: guaranteeing food security, technology geared towards more macroeconomic growth, and logistics focused on the strengthening of our infrastructure and for ports and urban areas so that we can have logistics with activities and thus promoting development. Another national element which is important is the law for the system of integration, with which we have a national directorate for integration which aims to combat poverty and improve the quality of life of our people, promoting culture and social integration through active and permanent articulation with work of other public administration activities and the private sector to favor social, cultural, educational, political, and economic development in the country. Thus, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chairman, the establishment of the working group today is not the end. Rather, it's just the beginning of a process that should lead us in a very respectful and collaborative way to identify concrete actions and those that are useful for all of our states in the fight against poverty, and the strides that are made be gradual and visible. All of this is within the framework of the resources that the organization has, and bearing in mind the commitment that have been made to guarantee open, transparent, and inclusive efforts in the organization. We have the challenge to not duplicate efforts, but rather to articulate all the work that the organization has to do and other organizations in the system towards a common objective, based on the results of ministerial processes in the inter-American system, mechanisms that we have at our fingertips, and the approved instruments, such as the Social Charter of the Americas, agreed to by all member states. Let's not overlook this new opportunity. Let's not lose it to take actions that have a real impact throughout our region. Poverty is a challenge that we all have to grapple with. We confront it, and it's our collective responsibility to act with determination and solidarity to contribute to slashing the inequality, social exclusion gap which still prevails in the hemisphere. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, El Salvador. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Uruguay.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Sir, Chairman, shared chairmanship. The President of Uruguay a few days ago remembered us of a song that when we were kids, we all sang. A song which an Uruguayan singer sang, and it reminded me of a very beautiful sentence in the song. The poor man that feels cold, and he doesn't complain about being cold, and doesn't complain about being cold at all anymore. And I think that is a good point of departure to say what we feel when it comes to this issue of poverty and our document on the poverty and the draft resolution. The truth of the matter is that we are very constructive, and a text like this is very welcome, particularly because it speaks to improving this tragedy. When you look at the text and you see the objective of eradicating poverty in all of its forms and dimensions, and it reminds us that the region in which we live, that is part of us, is the most unequal in the world. And the most unequal in the world, you look at the levels of extreme poverty, because it's good to look at extreme poverty, critical poverty, and marginalization is an act of violence against ourselves, and that we ourselves produce. And marginalization and extreme poverty and critical poverty we have put on the shoulders of children. People can say it's really bad for adults, but children in extreme and critical poverty and who are marginalized, I mean, come on, look, we're off point. And that's why these words against poverty will not kill the hunger of people. But there's really no starting point for this narrative. At some point, we're going to have to stop and look and say, look, what are we thinking about? And we have an idea of some kind of social contract, a kind of Russian-like social contract. We have to look at what we're doing, and this is just one small pebble in the sea of rocks. And part of the crisis is to combat poverty, and we have to have actions. Oftentimes they're not coordinated. Multilateral organizations should have a bit of greater convergence with multilateral actions that in some form or fashion have to have the ability to beam it out, to speak it and talk to the multilateral organizations, and to come here and do so, because in the final analysis in this session, it could be another academic session. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be that at all. If this is one of the most important topics, one of the most imperative that we have on the agenda, well then, look, if we had a magic wand, we don't have a magic wand, right? And you could say, well, look, How are we going to solve this issue of poverty? What is the magic wand that each and every one of you has? You're not going to agree. I can tell you, I promise you, you're not going to agree because you think in different ways. One believes in a restriction because of the state apparatus and with regard to distribution. Others agree with different apparatus of the states. Now, let me just tell you something. You know where there's an absolute coincidence to generate a driving force when it comes to combating poverty? It's education. It's education. It's education. 4 times, it's education. Let me say it 5 times. It's education, period. That's it. And that's the issue. That's our force. So the real mechanism to eradicate poverty and that will generate social mobility and moving up, it's through education. And of course, you have to have resources, you not spend superfluous expenditures and behave wastefully. You've got to combat corruption in a continent that it's really entrenched in corruption, and it's shameful in terms of the levels of corruption that we see. So it's not all that difficult, and in the final analysis, to come and go down certain paths that we have to all traverse. Well, you're going to say you're saying that, well, how do you see it? Well, look, we have to make this sound better. I look at the studies and I look at the indicators just like all of you. I look at the book of Steven Pinker and Madam Roseland as well. Well, the world is better today than it was a few years ago, but it's not the world that we dream about, that we want. No, not even close to it. This is a region that is absolutely asymmetrical. Within our own countries, there are asymmetries. You've got an urban, people have the urban, the rural, people go to the peripheries, and everything is a little bit different. So it depends where you put in your magnifying glass and where you look at where poverty is. You look at other regions in the world, and to a certain extent, they're a little bit better, and I say it in all due respect to Europeans. When you look at them, yeah, they put together their act very well. I don't know what the future is going to be like. Well, that's their issue. That's their problem, so to speak. We reproduce a lot. I don't know what they're going to do, but we reproduce poverty. We have to take a look at this because we have to look at these things here. My friends from the United States are here. If we are more integrated as a region, and if we have a dynamic of cooperation, good trade amongst ourselves, and we have access which is much more liquid and speeded up, well, we're going to be better off. And look, we're not expecting that anyone will do anything. The Europeans are on their path, the Asians are on their path, and for us, no. Look, guys, please, you take the train, you jump on, and we're the same continent, from the north to the south. We should have a greater integration mechanism. And look, this is in the playbook what I'm talking about. The Europeans went through a war and they saw that things didn't work, and they integrated people that had ethnicities, and they were so different. They got together. Everybody was totally different. They put together a continent where everybody has a central bank, they have one currency, they have services across the board. Well, let's see if it's easier to iron out those borders in our countries. There are a host of different challenges, practical challenges that we have to deal with from here on in. And I think a lot can be done. I think that it's really good to make a contribution. But look, one last story that I'm going to tell you, an anecdote. Well, you always have to talk as if you're going to die in a half an hour. And so you say everything that you feel like, and then if you die, well, no big deal. Well, okay. Well, then, if you don't die, well, then your conscience is free. So in 1813 in Uruguay, a cool guy, super intelligent, Mr. Ortega, invented a host of different instructions for my region and for my country. and they were instructions where the issue of poverty was the main topic, and it is. And he reasoned it out with freedoms and other mechanisms that have to do with democratic ways and means, and then he spoke about trade. And furthermore, this man for us is the brains behind building our identity, was saying in the instructions themselves, look, let's trade with the English. And the very same place where he was thinking about the fight, it was a fight for regional autonomy. And at the same time, he was saying, look, I don't want to get lost. I don't want to fall off the track, because we're talking about a trade track. So that, look, the document is well received. Congratulations once again. Look, I don't know what we have to do in English. I don't know what we would do if you weren't here. Where are you? Houston. Houston. I'm here. Well, I don't know what we're going to do, but look, this is part of your success to come up with this kind of document. So look, the text is well received. It's going to serve us for something. You never know, really. There's the possibility of navigating something down the line. But I am very enthusiastic about it. I'm very happy about it. I trust it, and I think it's going to be fabulous. You never really know. Well, this is like literature. People who write a lot. People who write a lot. They write hundreds and hundreds of books, and there's one that jumps out at you. We really don't know if this is going to have any greater scope. Just one last second. Thank you very much for the floor.
I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Grenada.
Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished Mr. Chair, Secretaries, Excellencies. Grenada and the co-sponsoring CARICOM delegations are resolute in our commitment to the eradication of poverty. And we recognize in this resolution a meaningful step towards realizing the inclusive and sustainable development goals that our region and our hemisphere urgently needs. On behalf of Grenada's and the co-sponsoring CARICOM group delegations, I would like to acknowledge the critical collaborative effort that has gone into crafting, consulting, refining, and tabling this resolution. With very special thanks to Antigua and Barbuda's delegation and its permanent representative, in particular, Dean Ambassador Sir Ronald Sanders, for their leadership, as well as to all the other co-sponsoring delegations. The establishment of a joint working group on the eradication of poverty and combating inequality and social exclusion in the Americas is a vital and timely initiative. And here, I wish to acknowledge and salute the delegations of Colombia and also the Secretary General, who, along with the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda, initiated this phase of focus of our work when they crafted and presented us at this council with the Manifesto Against Poverty, where it started. This resolution, as it is acclaimed today, recognizes that poverty is not just a material deficiency, but also a profound barrier to dignity, human rights, and social cohesion across the Americas. This is a very strong motivator for our delegation's commitment to fully supporting the working group's mandate to develop a comprehensive, actionable plan of activities for poverty eradication, one that addresses both immediate relief, where possible, and long-term structural change that is imperative. We are particularly encouraged by the resolution's emphasis on addressing inequalities in healthcare, in education, as well as economic opportunities. It is imperative that the working group prioritizes mechanisms for equitable access, not only as a matter of justice, but also as a foundation for sustainable development. We also strongly support the collaboration with entities across the inter-American system and the wider multilateral arena, as outlined in the resolution itself, because this coordinated approach is an opportunity to draw on proven and emerging effective poverty reduction policies, as those mentioned here, and those also mentioned in the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, and other best practices that enable the working group to incorporate feasible and actionable components of its work. Further, we align with the directive to ensure that this resolution, including the plan of action that will be developed, does not duplicate but further builds on the significant work already done within the Organization of American States and elsewhere. This would enable us to use available and new resources strategically and achieve outcomes that are impactful and also sustainable. With this resolution, we are also taking a significant step, as the Dean mentioned, towards gender equality. We are told and we know that gender-based disparities exacerbate poverty and social exclusion. We look forward to specific measures that empower women and girls, providing them with tools and resources to lift themselves and our societies through their families out of poverty, in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda, Goal 5. We also endorse the urgency and reiterate that it is urgent. The urgency expressed in the resolution to convene a plan of action within, if possible, as soon as 90 days that we can see. And Grenada stands ready to work alongside the working group to identify priority actions that can be implemented immediately to address this most pressing need. I close, Madam Chair, by expressing and reiterating that we fully endorse the resolution and we look forward to active participation in the joint working group. We believe that this resolution and the movement, the energy around it, represents a shared commitment across our region, across our hemisphere, and offers a very meaningful pathway towards a transformative change that our people so much deserve. I thank you.
Thank you, Grenada. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of the Dominican.
Good afternoon. Chair of the Permanent Council and Chair of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, and ladies and gentlemen, we thank the Chairman of the Permanent Council as well as the Inter-American Council on Integral Development for convening this meeting on such an important topic for our country as poverty. It also generates much concern for the future and the need for eradicating poverty and providing the citizens of the Americas a prosperous future. We'd like to take this opportunity to highlight the initiative of the delegations of Colombia and Antigua and Barbuda, as well as the co-sponsors of the resolution to establish a working group on the eradication of poverty, and that works to also continue enforcing the work that our organization has been carrying out through the Inter-American Council for Integral Development on the subject. Poverty continues to be one of our greatest challenges, and it is essential that we have an integral approach to do this in an equitable and inclusive and sustainable way. For the Dominican Republic, the fight against poverty is a priority, and we have implemented public policy to reduce food insecurity and poverty and to improve the condition of life of those that are most vulnerable. And we have made great strides in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals in keeping with the 2030 national agenda. Mr. and Mrs. Chairman, eradication of poverty is a common goal for the countries of our region, and it is in that sense that it is so important that our delegations work in a coordinated and collaborative manner when addressing this issue. And in this vein, we remind you of the joint declaration of shared commitments that our representative from Costa Rica has mentioned, that expresses the need for negotiation processes to be open, transparent, and inclusive so that we can have more legitimate and inclusive decisions made by the bodies of the organization, and thus contributing to the construction of more broad and solid consensus. Furthermore, it's important that we highlight the fact that our delegation considers the recently adopted text reflective the urgency with which our states must address poverty with determination. And this is not only an economic challenge, but multidimensional that impacts human rights, social inclusion, as well as sustainability. Our collective support of this resolution that has been demonstrated by the adoption by consensus demonstrates the hemispheric commitment to eradicating poverty. And we congratulate the fact that this text addresses vulnerable groups and reflects a broad approach in the fight against poverty and counts on international mechanisms and specialized institutions of the Inter-American system for this task. And this adds value to the group and to the achievement of its goals. Furthermore, we value the proposal of a clear timeline and a follow-up mechanism, which are both essential for ensuring accountability and effective evaluation of progress made in eradicating poverty. And lastly, Madam Chair, we reiterate our disposition, our availability for working collectively with the working group and to redouble efforts in order to eradicate poverty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dominican Republic. I now give the floor to Paraguay.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Sir Chair. Paraguay delegation would like to express its congratulations for the resolution that we have just approved to establish a working group, a joint working group on the eradication of poverty in the Americas. And in this joint session between the Permanent Council and the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, our Chief of State, or Head of State, Mr. Peña, has said that development can't be adhered to macroeconomic guidelines, but it needs to focus on the most vulnerable population with reduction of poverty in the fastest way possible. And that is why we find this to be the fitting setting for reaffirming Paraguay's commitment to eradicating poverty in all of its dimensions in our country as well as the rest of the hemisphere. Madam Chair, and Sir Chair, we would like to highlight the pending paragraphs that were left unfinished on the 24th of October. We would like to express our constructive collaboration, and we would like to clarify the scope of a paragraph for our country.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Honduras.
Thank you so much, Chair. There's nothing better than beginning an intervention with a quote, which is very important. This is from President John F. Kennedy. If a free society cannot help its poor, it will not be able to help its many rich citizens. The Honduran delegation is pleased that we have come together to support this resolution, the resolution that we too co-sponsored. This is a battle that has not begun today, but many years ago. And we have made strides, but it doesn't mean that we should not continue to work in this vein. Our country, Honduras, believes that it would be vital that for a reduction of poverty, that those pay taxes to the benefit of all of the citizens, because when there's less poverty, there's greater stability. The President, Xiomara Castro, presented a law regarding a group of families that are pushing back. In 2023, the tax law, was submitted to Congress for its approval. Never before have we had such a debated law as this, with more than 85 awareness activities. And within the framework of this law on tax justice, we've seen the way in which the tax system makes the rich richer and the poor poorer, which has allowed us to generate a greater support from the population. The powerful minorities have pointed to all sorts of strategies that will impede the approval of this law. Every support, all support, anybody that expresses support for this law is threatened. We have Juan Orlando Hernandez, who is, among others, is one of the greatest barriers that the president's administration runs into. In the case of Honduras, the tax justice law is a priority for combating poverty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honduras, and I'll give the floor to Guatemala.
Thank you so much to the chairs for giving me the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, the commitment of our member states to the eradication of poverty has been the driving force of all of the interventions that have come before me. And without a doubt, this is a common objective among us all. And it is a universal inspiration that is expressed since the 1948 constitutional document. We have the responsibility to develop societies where you have democracy, security, peace, and respect, and the complete respect for human rights. The agenda against inequality and poverty must never be suspended. On the contrary, this agenda must advance and must be strengthened. And with this in mind, the resolution that we recently approved, that was presented by the delegations of Colombia and Antigua and Barbuda, has intensified our joint efforts to face an issue that represents a barrier to the fulfillment of our peoples. Over history, there have been different efforts made in this forum. Within the CITES framework, in particular in the Inter-American Commission, REMDES, we have promoted a constructive debate and cooperation among the key sectors of civil society, education, private sector. And we have worked on eradication of poverty and combating inequality, as well in a sustainable way. In light of this joint work, I would like to highlight a few aspects, such as many other delegations here have pointed out. It is important that we strengthen the existing mechanisms and avoid duplication of efforts. The interconnection of our organizations within the OAS, as well as mechanisms of the Inter-American system of protection of human rights, allows us to advance forward on solid ground toward universal goals. Let's not make the mistake of adopting documents that we then go into oblivion. My delegation would like to highlight that it considers it foundational and fundamental that many other delegations have also said it's important that in these procedures in negotiations that we respect the diversity of voices, and this will allow us to arrive at true consensus as a multilateral organization. And it's also important to respect the time frames and establish a timeline for the due consultation with our capitals, so that the countries can prepare themselves to take a position, always with the goal of advancing together. And to close, I would like to reiterate that Guatemala firmly supports this effort to eradicate poverty and promote inclusion in our region. And we are also committed and constructively working together on this collective goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paraguay. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Chile. Chile, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, chairs. Thank you to all the delegations that have promoted this resolution, in particular Antigua and Barbuda and all the other co-sponsors. We especially value the collective work of all of the delegations to avoid duplicity and duplication of efforts, and to lean on the existing mechanisms, in particular with those that are Ministry of Social Ministries. With this purpose, our delegation sent its proposal for an amendment in writing, and they were accepted. And we did this because, in the case of Chile, for political reasons, economic and social reasons, as well as historical reasons and ethical reasons, this is an important issue. In terms of the historical aspects, I think that our experience as a country can be helpful to this recently established working group. Of course, we're not talking about copying recipes. That doesn't make sense. But learning from the past and learning of the weaknesses can serve for the future. So in March of 1990, after 17 years of dictatorship, when the president takes power, we were a very poor country. If you look at the data, in 1990, 70+% of the population was poor, of the households were poor. And so 34 years ago, what happened so that, after recovering from the pandemic, we now have a record 6.7% of homes living in poverty. So there are two pieces of news here. One's good and one's bad. Now, the bad news is that there's no panacea, there's no perfect recipe that can be applied universally to combat poverty. But the good news is that you can, when many different hands come together for this purpose. And one of those hands is called the invisible hand, as the literature mentions it. But there are other visible hands, and I'd like to name 3 of them right now. Let's think about taxes. As soon as the democracy launched, President Allende pushed forward a tax reform. So, for example, in this way, taxes on income, which went from 0% to 15%. And at the time, they said that this reform would mortgage the future of the country, but that wasn't the case. And later, there was another reform to the tax system that also helped. Then there's a second hand, visible hand, where every year the democracy increased the salaries just ahead of inflation, because this is the only way to elevate the working population. So 1990 was the beginning of this journey, and then this year we have been facing new challenges. And a third visible hand, social policies and transfers. Reducing poverty has only been possible thanks to a network of public policies that focus on the poorest regions and also universal approaches. And we're talking about education or co-payments in healthcare, which were implemented last year. So in summary, in these 5 short minutes that I have, I think that this allows us to deliver the lesson that the market doesn't reign, and nor does the state. So to conclude, Madam Chairman, the poverty today, and I agree with the experts in academia, is not only about income. Today we have multidimensional poverty, which implies measuring, and just to mention some of the dimensions, you have access to education, health, employment, social security, and the conditions in which people live, and the setting of one's home, and how much you participate in the democracy, and whether or not you're treated as an equal, and security. And that's why it's very valuable that social inclusion and equality are in the title of this group. And Chile hopes to support this effort. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chile. I now give the floor to the Ambassador of Panama.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. One of the priorities of President Molino, once he took power 4 months ago, is the integral approach to poverty. This is not an issue of income alone, but it also implies combating the multidimensional nature of poverty and the exclusion that really impacts human dignity in the region. In this sense, this joint effort with its multidimensional approach aligns with the implementation efforts of public policies that are integral and that don't only reduce extreme poverty, but also promote economic inclusion and gender equality, as well as support for the most vulnerable populations. In our delegation, the approval of this resolution, which establishes a working group, a joint working group in this permanent council with the CD for the eradication of poverty and combating inequality and social exclusion in the Americas, reflects our commitment, our collective commitment, and brings visibility to the efforts that are being carried out in this topic in other instances of the OAS, in particular in the ministers' meetings, in particular in the area of social development. Madam Chairman, this resolution reaffirms our regional cooperation to address our cross-cutting challenges such as climate change, irregular migration, and development. And we hope that this initiative allows us to align with these SDG goals in the Agenda for 2030, in particular with regard to SDG 1, bringing an end to poverty around the world, and strengthening a platform on which we can work toward eradication of poverty and sustainable human development. For our government, this session represents the opportunity to reaffirm that not only through the effective commitment from all sectors can we overcome the structural barriers that perpetuate poverty. And we believe that this will contribute to build the synergies among our member states, and in particular in the areas of the OAS and the Inter-American system, to thus achieve a more effective work and to achieve a more prosperous future for our region. And lastly, we'd like to thank all of the delegations that have supported the resolution, and we reaffirm our commitment with the principles and objectives therein. We also hope that the fruit of our labor are tangible and are felt by the citizens of our region. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Panama. I now give the floor to the representative of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Chairpersons. The delegation of Trinidad and Tobago is pleased to be a co-sponsor of this relevant, timely, and very important resolution that outlines concrete actions for this organization to address the very pressing and lamentable issue of poverty. The government of Trinidad and Tobago recognizes the impact that persistent poverty and inequality has on the quality of life of its citizens and the achievement of its development objectives. We have seen the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and increased climate-related disasters on the development trajectory of our region. We cannot allow our most vulnerable communities to be left behind, as this can lead to, among other things, instability and social unrest. The gains that we have worked hard to achieve over the past decades must be restored and preserved, and there is no better place to address poverty than within this hemispheric body. It is our belief that the expertise and institutional memory that resides within these hallowed halls form the appropriate foundation for us to collectively address this issue. In closing, I wish to thank the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda for leading the charge on this critical matter, and I reiterate the commitment of my delegation to working with all member states and the General Secretariat to break the cycle of poverty and build a future for all of our people, especially the most vulnerable among us. I thank you.
Thank you, Trinidad and Tobago. I now give the floor to the representative from St. Kitts and Nevis.
Thank you, chairs, secretariat, permanent representatives, alternate representatives, observer missions, everyone. Good afternoon. My delegation would like to first thank Antigua and Barbuda for spearheading this resolution and establishing this important working group. St. Kitts and Nevis understands and would like to advance the perspective that the fight against poverty is indeed a fight for basic human rights and dignity. It is a fight for education and health care. It is a fight for decent housing and nutrition. It is a fight for the very sustenance and the true substance of life itself. It is for this reason that our delegation wholeheartedly and unequivocally aligns itself with the principles of this resolution and fully supports the resolution. In some quarters, Chair, it is said that poverty is a sin. But if this is so, it is a sin for which the victims pay the penalty while the perpetrators enjoy exoneration, absolution in this sense. We know that the systems that produce inequality are the same systems that create poverty. These are the systems that encourage and reward the accumulation of wealth and the monetization of basic human rights like healthcare and education, for example. Chairs and esteemed colleagues, if education is the key to the liberation from poverty, then all states that truly believe in the eradication of poverty would be willing to give that key to all of their people, especially the youth, free of cost at all levels. Set them free, and the nations will be free. Set them free, and the hemisphere will be free. Set them free, and free all humanity. Education is where the eradication of poverty begins, because it opens access to various other resources. St. Kitts and Nevis, the smallest sovereign state in this hemisphere, hence in this Organization of American States, with a population of about 50,000. We have made education free from kindergarten to college. We have released the key. Additionally, all of our citizens and residents, not just the citizens, have access to free health care. Of course, given our meager resources, there are challenges, but we face them accordingly and manage to offer the 5th highest minimum wage in the Caribbean. It takes a genuine endeavor to advance in the fight against poverty. Chairs, the fight to eradicate poverty must continue to be the focus of the world and certainly our focus in the Americas. Being the survivors of the negative effect, if not the wrath of colonialism, which has left so many of us struggling to overcome that violation to this day, it is our duty to champion this cause. We must hold hands and march in one accord, embracing all of the initiatives outlined. This is why this resolution is so relevant, chairs. We see poverty firsthand, and some of us even experience poverty in to various extents. Chairs, we know that we must eradicate poverty because who feels it knows it. May it please you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, St. Kitts and Nevis. I now give the floor to the Ambassador Barbados.
Thank you, chairs. The prolongation of this meeting is not the intention of the Barbados delegation in regard to the closeness to the lunch hour. We do wish, however, to signal both by our vote and by our voice support for the resolution brought by the distinguished representative of Antigua and Barbuda, Sir Ronald Sanders. Poverty eradication, while an elusive goal, must not become an impossible goal. Poverty eradication must remain the primary objective of this esteemed body and must be vigorously and urgently pursued by this OAS until no one is left behind in poverty. I thank you.
Thank you, Barbados. I now recognize the Holy See.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. This delegation is very happy to see this joint session of the Permanent Council and the Inter-American Council for Integral Development. And as such, we have taken due note, rest assured, of the proposal presented as well as the comments made from the illustrious delegations. Pope Francisco has said time and time again and expressed his deepest desire to eradicate poverty in the entire world. And especially looking at this region, he has emphasized the need to broach the economic, social inequalities that affect this hemisphere. He has emphasized that we cannot nor should we accept poverty and hunger in nations that enjoy the generous contributions of Mother Nature, such as is the case of many countries that are represented right here in this room. Furthermore, the United Nations and Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations has decided to eradicate poverty, and it is a priority for them, and to ensure that projects that help be respectful of local communities. Their approach is focused on solidarity, social justice, and implementation of very brave policies that promote comprehensive, all-encompassing, sustainable development. And for the services of human development, the mission is to promote development for all people. Now, as far as concerns eradication of poverty, work is linked with the Episcopal conferences and all the efforts made to promote education as a cornerstone to have a quality of life for all people. Having said that, this delegation, which is the joint working group, all the best with a view to taking decisive steps to eradicate poverty in this region. May our brothers and sisters of this hemisphere have and live in a better world and increasingly more humane. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, the Holy See. Colleagues, I now extend gratitude to all of you for your valuable contributions. I relinquish the floor to my colleague, the Chair of the Permanent Council, for the closure of this joint meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Colleagues, we have now addressed all items on today's agenda. But before I adjourn the meeting, I want to express my gratitude to all representatives for your valuable participation. I think we all know that the last few weeks have been very busy and intense as we grapple with very important issues, not the least of which is the task of ensuring that this organization is appropriately financed to efficiently deliver on its mandate. So I know all the work that has been done there, but still it hasn't prevented us from doing considerable work on this resolution, which reflects, I believe, how important the issue of poverty is for all of us. And so I sincerely thank everybody for their inputs here today. And the interventions, of course, will be reflected in the minutes of this meeting. And I want to encourage all delegations and the General Secretariat to continue this important dialogue and actively engage in implementing the resolution. Thank you for your commitment to this critical cause. With no further business to address, I hereby adjourn the meeting. Adjourned.